For over 3 centuries, the transatlantic slave trade displaced millions of Africans, tearing families apart and reshaping the economies and societies of Africa, Europe, and the Americas. It was one of history's most devastating human tragedies, driven by greed, power, and profit. But what caused this massive system of forced immigration? How did it shape the world, and what led to its abolition? The roots of the transatlantic slave trade lay in the European colonization of the Americas. As sugar, tobacco, and cotton plantations expanded, so did the demand for labor. European powers turned to Africa, where kingdoms such as Dahomey and Ngowo had long practiced slavery. However, with European involvement, the scale of the trade exploded. In exchange for weapons and goods, African rulers sold captives, prisoners of war, criminals, or victims of raids to European traders. These men, women, and children were forced onto ships bound for the New World in a brutal journey known as the Middle Passage. The conditions aboard slave ships were horrific. Disease, starvation, and abuse claimed countless lives before the captives ever reached the Americas. Yet, the trade continued for centuries, enriching European economies while devastating African communities. The African slave trade reshaped the world in the Americas. Enslaved Africans became the backbone of plantation economies, producing sugar in the Caribbean, tobacco in North America, and coffee in Brazil. But the human cost was unmeasurable. Families were torn apart, cultures were erased, and entire African regions were depopulated. Meanwhile, European and American economies flourished. While some African leaders benefited from the trade, the long-term effects were devastating. The loss of millions of people weakened African societies, making them vulnerable to future colonization. By the late 18th century, a growing movement emerged to end the transatlantic slave trade. The Enlightenment's ideals of liberty and equality inspired many to question slavery's morality. Religious groups, particularly the Quakers, condemned the trade as a sin. The abolition movement
A call to
gained
action.
momentum.
Words that ignite a movement,
Denmark
an empty
was the
stage
first
bathed in a
to
single
ban its slave
spotlight.
trade
William
in
Wilberforce, eyes
1803.
blazing, addresses a hushed crowd.
Britain
William
and the
Wilberforce,
United
how can we,
States followed
in good conscience,
in
tolerate this
1807,
barbaric trade?
with the
Every
US
shackle, every
ban
lash, every
taking
life stolen
effect
screams
in
for justice.
1808.
Cheers erupt
By
from the darkness.
1836,
The spotlight widens,
the Dutch,
revealing a passionate
French,
crowd.
Spanish,
William Wilberforce.
Brazilian, and
We are not
Portuguese
powerless. We have
governments
voices.
had
We
all
have pens. We have
outlawed
hearts that
the
will
trade.
not be silenced. Let us.
But ending the trade was not easy. While Britain led efforts to enforce abolition with its powerful Royal Navy, illegal slave trading continued, especially in Brazil and Cuba. Many plantation owners resisted abolition, relying on secret routes and bribery to continue importing enslaved people. Despite international bans, the illegal slave trade thrived until the mid-19th century. It was only when economic pressures, naval enforcement, and internal resistance combined that the trade was finally crushed.